Hey everybody, welcome back to the studio. I hope you're all doing well, staying safe, staying sane, and that may be the harder of those two things right now, but I hope everybody's doing well. We've been doing a lot of live streaming lately. I think you may have seen some of the concerts, and I've been asked multiple times by a lot of people actually to go over some of the technical aspects of the streams, from the audio, the video side, the camera setups, lighting, our Blackmagic rig, and OBS that's over behind me. So I figured it was time to do some videos on that, and I'm going to start with a video on the audio setup, the signal flow coming in from the room, getting into the Trident, how I'm using Logic and outboard gear, and then ultimately how it's sending over to the Blackmagic to go out to OBS and out to the internets. I have Kelly and special effects session from a recent live stream setup on the board. Kelly was nice enough to let me use some of the audio to demonstrate this workflow. Those guys were awesome. If you missed that concert, you can see it on the Kelly Music YouTube channel. It's also on the Ultimate Studios Inc. YouTube channel. Go check it out. I'm gonna give you a little taste right now just so you can hear where we are, and then I'm gonna break everything down. So here's what the stream ultimately sounded like. That's a little taste of how the stream sounded. So it is the multi-tracked audio, but it's going through the same exact path as the actual live stream. So let's start with just talking about the kind of how the setup in the room is and how I have the Trident set up for the multi-tracking side and how it's going into Logic. So first off, we are in a recording studio and we're not trying to hide that. By that I mean we're using the ISO boost for amps. I'm using gobos to control kind of bleed and that sort of thing. Not trying to kill bleed, just trying to control it so we can get the best sound possible for the stream and for the multi-track audio. As far as the miking goes, I'm not really doing anything different than I would on a normal live session, or any session for that matter. The only thing different I can see in there, I still have my ORTF set up for my drum overheads. And the drums are probably the one spot that's different because I'm not running as many mics, meaning I don't have all my extra room mics and some of the fun stuff. And by going with an ORTF coincident pair on the overheads, that allows us to have the stereo mics. And I like ORTF for that because I still get a pretty good stereo image from the overheads, but it's one stand, it's behind the drummer. It makes it cleaner for the video and it makes it easier as we get more people and things around the drums, not having those other big stands. So that's really why we do it. The rest of it, pretty much a normal session. The board, I'm doing all the normal things I would on a session. So any processing, EQ, compression, that sort of thing, all happening. For instance, my kick in and out, both of those channels get sent to bus 1 on the Trident, where I have my kick chain, which is a Sound Skulptor TS500 tape emulator, into a Trident A-Range EQ, into a DBX 160X compressor, then gets printed as one channel in Logic. Couple other things I'm doing. The overheads have a Heritage Audio Successor on it. This particular session, I don't have any other compression on any of the direct instruments. I do have some EQ here and there, usually pushing, pulling some high, that sort of things, just to make things pop. Then everything gets sent into Logic. And I kind of set Logic up as a split console. Half of it really is my tape machine, which is just tracking the multi-track audio, and then it's spitting everything back out to the monitor section. And this section right here is where the whole show is getting mixed. That's my panning, that's my volumes, that is everything is happening there. And I spend a lot of time in this area while the show is going on, mixing. This is not a set it and forget it kind of thing. I'm always active in the mix, paying attention to what's going on, trying to help make the stream sound as good as possible. Here, well, let's take a look at this real fast. So this is the first half. This is the tape machine half, and that is all this multi-tracked audio here. And you can see I have some buses, and that is sending to the headphone mixes, which is the split half, and that is right here. Now, this headphone mix is a little more complicated than it would be if I were mixing everything from in the box. But since I'm mixing the show analog out here in front of me, I have to kind of tell everything where it needs to go in the stereo field. So for instance, the drums, I'm basically sending a bunch of mono tracks into Logic and it's just being captured there, and then it comes back out here, and this is where the panning happens. So Logic doesn't know, if I send channel 1 to bus 1, it doesn't know if it's left, right, where it is. So what I do is I mirror my auxes with my audio, and then I do all my panning on the auxes, and I send them out the correct outputs to go to the headphone mixers for each artist that's out in the live room. I have templates for that. It takes me 2 minutes to set up. It's not a big deal, but I like staying with the main mix out here on the board for a couple of reasons. One, I obviously like how it sounds. Two, it's faster. I don't have to interface anything with the mouse. I don't have to scroll in there. If I'm mixing, I can go right to things. Plus I have some outboard effects that I'll get to in just a second it's all right in front of me, so it's instantaneous. There's no fumbling around anywhere. So the headphone mix ends up being complicated, but once it's set up, it's done. And like I said, I already have templates for that stuff, so I can just import that piece of cake, no problem. The only other thing I do from inside the box is any effects that need to go to the artist out in the live room, that is set up here. So for this session with Kieli, his acoustic guitar, you can see right here. Bus 11 is his headphone send. That's going over here to these two buses right here. And then 19 and 20, I have a plate reverb, and I have a delay with a little bit of a plate reverb. That all gets set up in sound check, gets dialed in to where the artist is happy, and then that stays that way. I never move it. For all these plugins, and you can see over here, even on this side, I have some channel EQs, just cutting off some bottom a little bit here on some of the keys. I use all stock Logic plugins, not doing anything fancy here. Heavy lifting is all happening out here. I want the session to stay lean and mean with no problems, and the Logic plugins, quite frankly, are nice. And they do the trick. So that is the DAW setup. Now, once everything is out here, so the mixing happens here on the monitor section. Like I said earlier, I change volumes a lot. I am actively mixing. If there's a solo that needs to come out, if something gets too loud, I'm constantly kind of just massaging the mix. Now, how this gets sent to the computer that's over behind me, which is the video rig, that's our Blackmagic switcher and OBS. I use aux 7 and 8 on the console is my send to my stream channel, which is right here on channel 21, 22, the board. I'll get to this part of the channel later. So the way I set up aux 7 and 8, I set my volumes usually always to about 75% on or right at 3 o'clock because the volume changes are actually happening from the monitor section. This just kind of opens the floodgates. I get some of my panning set up here and then I leave those things. So any changes I make volume-wise are gonna happen from the monitor section. Aux 7 and 8 goes to the line inputs of 21 and 22 on the board. This is my main send to the Blackmagic. It's also where I have my mix bus effects. There's a couple ways to do this really. The reason why we do it here on the board is because when we start out a stream, Ernesto is usually manning the Blackmagic and OBS, and there's multiple things that have to happen there at the same time, which would make it hard to do those two things and open audio up in the switcher at the same time. So we've decided that our workflow works best, that I have control of that here because I can simply mute it. Or I can pull it down and I can do a fade in, fade out, whatever. I have control here. He cuts in the video, I cut in the audio, and we're off and running. And it's just, like I said, there's more than one way to do it. This is just what has worked best for us. That may change in the future, I don't know, but for right now, this is how we do it. So that's our mainstream send. And that's coming from aux 7 and 8 on the console, which is coming in the line inputs. Now, I do have some effects inserted here. That is my AMS Neve 8803 EQ into my Smart Research C1 compressor into a pair of Rupert Neve 542 tape emulators. Not a lot of compression happening there, especially when things are tight, but there is a little bit, it's working. The Neve EQ is fantastic, and then the Rupert Neve tape emulator just sounds, it's just icing on the cake, man. It sounds so good. Now for monitoring, here's the important part, because there's a couple different places I have to monitor just to make sure everything is right. First thing, I have a feed coming from the switch over behind me that comes in right here on top of the board. Cool thing about the Trident, it has a 2-track in on the top of the console, so you can plug things into it real quick and listen. We're taking a feed from the switch, which is the final step before uplink. That is here, and that's what I'm listening to. That's important because I need to know right at that point what's going up. Because depending on your bandwidth, you can lose a little bit of low end and you can lose some high end in your streams. I have another set of headphones coming from the video machine that are over there. We'll get to that in a second. That is the YouTube feed or Facebook or wherever it's going to, that I can monitor what's actually being listened to. So I have right before the uplink and I have right after the uplink. So I know I can listen to both those things. I can see how the low end's translating. I can listen to see if my effects are too much or too little, because sometimes that stuff gets a little bit lost. So I may actually have a mix up here that I'm listening to that maybe it's a little heavier in the bass, or maybe I have a little bit more of the effects on than I normally would because some of that's getting lost in the uplink. For us, we have pretty good bandwidth, so it's not really a big issue, but I still pay close attention to it. And that's really important to make sure it's translating and it sounds good for you guys and that I'm happy. Trust me, I go back and I listen to everything and make sure I didn't make any bad mistakes, and if I did, I try to fix them. So that is the send to the stream. So now the fun stuff. I have some effects set up that I can do in real time. First off, I have one effect that is a set it and forget it effect, and it is my Yamaha Pro R3 reverb. And that I use for kind of an ambient sound, and everybody goes to it. So nothing is too dry, which, matter of fact, let's just demo that. I'm gonna leave it on, so you're gonna hear what we just heard. That's with the reverb on, and what the stream would sound like going up. Now let's take a listen to just what the reverb sounds like. It's not a long reverb. It's short, and everybody's just going there a little bit. This is kind of the glue. One, it gives everything a sense of a little bit of space, but it glues everybody together and makes them feel like they're in the same space. It also really helps when there's open vocal mics in the room. For instance, the Iron Point concert we did, they had 3 open vocal mics in the room the entire time. Open vocal mics on a stage, a studio, anywhere there's drums mean drum room mics, and not necessarily the drum room mics you want, because it makes it hard to get your vocals to sound good, and it can be challenging sometimes. What this reverb does, if you send everybody to it, I'm sending drums, guitar, in this case keys, both the electric and acoustic. I'm not sending Rick's bass for this one because he already has a certain amount of effects on there, so I leave it. But for Iron Point, vocals went to that as well, all 3 of their guitars, the bass, the drums. It tends to mask the fact a little bit that you have open vocal mics, so you don't hear the obvious distant mic that sounds like kind of a not so good drum room mic. Everything gets blended a little together, a little smoothed out, and it just sounds alive and it sounds together. So what does this sound like without the reverb? See, it's really short. And I have control. I'm sending everything kind of even. Usually, just for clarification, usually aux 5 and 6 on the board is my send to the Pro R3. But I can't send that to the monitor mix, which is what we're listening to, on playback. So I've done a kind of a temporary setup up here on aux 1 and 2. Usually aux 1, 2, 3, and 4 have different effects, which I'll talk about in a second. But for our purposes today, aux 1 and 2 are acting as my temporary sends so we can hear what this reverb sounds like. But I do have some control. I usually never leave the master on the effects return full blown. I kind of set it at about 3/4 or whatever, so it gives me headroom if I do want to push it. I don't often, but I could. It's too much. There's none. So it's just getting a little, just to kind of tie things together. And I have a couple different patches I like. It'll change depending on the band. This one is patch 33, which is the Bright Studio, which I like. Worked great for these guys. So that's the kind of set it and forget it. Now the other ones are the fun ones. I usually have my TC Electronic D2 delay in. I have on that, this would be usually aux 1 through 4 of these other ones. So there's a D2 delay, there's a Yamaha SPX 90 reverb, and I have a cheap TC Electronics M350 that I really dig, and that usually has a little bit of a delay pushing into a reverb. And those are up here on these first 4 auxes. So anywhere during the show, I've got stuff to play with. And that's another reason I like having it on the board. It's right in front of me. I can react quick. You know, if there's a vocal that I want to put something on, or maybe there's a guitar solo that needs a little extra sauce, or the sax, or a vocal, or whatever it is. Those are all there. I can use them, and I do quite often, at least in certain spots. So that is the main setup of all of this. You got the signal flow coming from the room, got the Trident set up, how I use Logic, and then how the stream goes out, and then some of the effects. Now, let's just take a look at how it goes over to the Blackmagic switch and OBS. For audio on this side, it's actually pretty simple because it's really just a stereo feed coming in. We have our Blackmagic switch down here. We have our Ultra Studio HD Mini. That's what's pushing the feed out to YouTube. We have our software control for the Blackmagic. We have OBS, and over here that's kind of out of frame, you can kind of see it, is just a monitor that's where all our camera angles will come up that you can see. For my audio's sake, I'm just sending a stereo feed over. This is our cable that's connecting the Blackmagic switch back to the Trident, so I can monitor exactly what's happening here right before it goes out. And then right here, I have another set of headphones that we use to monitor YouTube. And usually they'll be over there laying next to me, and I'll be going back and forth to listening to the 2-track from the Blackmagic and throwing on headphones and checking YouTube. It gets a little tricky sometimes because there's always a lag on YouTube, so it's like going back in time when you're listening and stuff. But it's kind of imperative to do that to make sure that what I'm hearing in here is in fact what's going out on the broadcast. So the software, we have this is the switcher side. There is an audio side that shows all our different audio. So all the camera audio will come up here as well. It's all muted. We never use any of that. Just on the right side, we have 1 track that comes in. That's our master from the board. Then that pushes out here to OBS. And then OBS sends everything out. Same thing here. We just have 1 channel. Here, let me hit play. Here's our feed coming into the switch. And then that feeds OBS. And this is the actual final volume that gets pushed out. I'm not doing any additional processing here. They do have some things you can do. I'm not doing any of that because I'm doing it with hardware. So this really is just making sure that we see good levels coming in here, and then we check our levels on YouTube to make sure they're acceptable. That's the whole setup in a nutshell. Little things change here and there depending on the size of the band. I might change some reverbs and that sort of thing, but for the most part, the actual signal flow is pretty much what I just showed you right now. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments and I'll get to them as best I can. We'll do a run through of the actual camera and video side here coming up on one of the live streams when we actually have everything set up. So anyway, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope stay safe, make music. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you guys in the next video.